And just initially, thank you very much for coming in today again. I just want to go back to the that my colleague Deputy Munster was discussing around the convention centre and just around the deductions and that. Can you just talk me through again the potential deduction from unitary payments in relation to payment years 10, 11, 12? Just talk to me through the reasons why you didn't withhold funds or why you didn't progress that as far as you could within the agreement.
I'll respond first, and I might bring Martin in on the detail there.
Sure.
We explained at the beginning that no decision has been taken yet. We're in dialogue with the convention centre and we're getting advice from the various parties involved. And just simply contractually, and I'm sure you'll understand this, when we have a 30-year contract with the group, until the issue is resolved, a decision is taken and implemented, the contract carries on and we just work the contract. As soon as the decision is taken, if that decision is taken to reduce the payment for the years in question, it'll simply be applied when that decision is taken. So there'll be no loss to the state. So it's a question of timing. The bigger question, I think, is what decision are we going to make and what is the correct approach to whether that 1.5 million, I think is the total in question, should be deducted from the payment. The payments are very large now. I mean, this is something that is over 20 million a year in a 30-year contract. This is a huge project which covers the building of the building, but the maintenance and the operation. So we have to look at this in its totality. And as I said earlier, the objective of the state is to successfully build up a convention business there that brings in tourism, particularly overseas tourism and overseas delegates to the centre. The company in place, we're doing well and we're meeting the targets and developing the business until COVID hit. COVID, we can talk about that as to what extent that risk should be taken or shared or whatever. They are obviously concerned, and it is obvious now that people will travel less for conventions and business meetings and so on. But surprisingly, the initial feedback is that in the first period, if I understand it correctly, Martin, they've done quite well in restoring activity to the convention centre. We also have to take into account they did accommodate Dáil Éireann during those periods at no charge to the group, so there are different factors there. And what they might be interesting for deputies here, and I think hasn't really been publicised and in the public domain, is that a few years ago we supported the operators in putting through a refinancing package for the overall package. And Martin, I think I'm correct in saying there was a saving to the state because of that. Which is a separate matter.
It's
so it's more complex.
It's a separate matter. Yeah, and I appreciate the totality of the contractual arrangement as such, but I think it's very important as well that the state take a strong position within all of the contracts that it's engaged in. I mean, from our perspective over the last number of months, we've been looking at, broadband, we've been looking at the Children's Hospital, the National Lottery, and it's apparent to us that on the private side, the operators take the most, shall I use the word robust rather than aggressive, position available to them within every licence, within every contractual arrangement. So it's of interest to us what the state's overall approach is too. And we would, I think, take the view, or certainly I would take the view, that the state should be at least as robust in its approach to the different contractual arrangements that it's engaged in the PPP. When you say we'll get it resolved, we'll make a decision and it'll sort of be resolved financially then, just give me a sense of how long it's taking to make this decision.
Okay, do you want to come in there, Martin?
Yeah, no, I'm happy. Thank you, Deputy. I think the issue with this one is that we're in a very unique situation with the convention centre. It's a situation that has never arisen before.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut across you, but I do have very little time.
Oh, yeah,
do you mind just answering how long it's taking?
I would envisage by the end of the first quarter of next year, February, March of next year, we should have all the information in that should allow us position and conclude a conversation with the convention
February, March
centre.
next year, and the decision is back over a 2-3 year window?
Yeah.
So we just don't know what the outcome is going to be for that period?
We don't, because there's very divergent views as to, and not with ourselves, but even like we heard the controller speaking earlier, he has a very clear view on a contract. There are people who have the exact opposite view on that. For instance, the department who sponsors the convention centre and the whole project actually have a view that no deductions should be applied.
And that's where you come in terms of the management of the state's
Yeah,
assets
exactly.
and the management of the contracts of those things. So that's why it's so important that the robustness is there within OPW in relation to the management of these contracts.
Yeah.
Could I ask you just a different matter? You will be aware that I've put in a lot of PQs in relation to the Children's Science Museum, which is of ongoing interest to me, that the OPW has gone through not one but two mediations in relation to this for the benefit of the committee. This was something that was agreed, I don't know by whom or how, over a decade ago, was put on ice because of the financial crash, was then essentially forced back on the agenda by the museum board. OPW resisted it with a mediation. It then came back on the agenda. It went away for, I can't recall the second reason. Then it came back on a second mediation, which was, I believe, concluded last year in a way that it seemed to me the OPW didn't want to be concluded. That has now been forced to progress with a museum. That was somebody's idea back in 2007. I don't understand. I appreciate that you've been forced to do this through the mediation. Can you give me a sense of the legal costs involved in 2021, the legal in relation to this mediation, or going back over the two mediations? And what on earth how have we ended up in a situation where it appears to me that you're being forced to progress a science museum in the concert hall that doesn't appear to be necessary because there's a perfectly good functional one out in Sandyford that I think hundreds of thousands of children have visited over the last number of years. Hundreds of different schools have come up via the M50 from all over Ireland to visit. Could you just explain this to me, please?
Okay, certainly, Deputy. Starting with the point on costs, the recently concluded arbitration, there are two arbitrations that were involved. Costs for that haven't been finalised yet, so I don't know what those costs will be.
Could you give me an approximate? Sometimes we ask, is it 1,000, is it 10,000, is it 100,000, approximately?
I don't know. I imagine it will be expensive, but I don't know what the cost will be.
Somewhere between 1 and 100,000. Any indication?
I can't give you any indication. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not familiar. There was barristers aplenty in the room.
This is the cost of the. Sorry, there are barristers aplenty in the room who haven't been setting fees and aren't responsible for the paying of the fees. The OPW is responsible for paying its own legal fees. It must have some sense of the liability that is incurred in legal fees through this process. Our legal
matters are managed by the CSSO, the Chief State Solicitor's Office and the AG's Office. So they handle the appointment of barristers and are negotiating fees.
And are they paying the fees or are you paying the fees?
They're paying fees.
So it doesn't come into you at all? Fair enough.
I'm sure we'll be involved, but we have no part in managing the fees that are paid. Coming back on the general question, I mean, you just made the point a moment ago how important it is for the state bodies to be robust in dealing with contract partners. So you're right, not a decade ago, 2 decades ago, the commitment was entered into to build a science museum by the government at the time, the OPW on behalf of the government. And the story went on from there, as you outlined. Quite simply, the OPW in itself, taking a narrow view, has always recognised that we have a binding contract to build this facility. But we also have a responsibility as a public body to try and ensure that it's successful and that all the outside circumstances are taken into account and that we're supporting the broader government policy and programme. So we would certainly have attempted to make connections between the promoters of the Aylesford Terrace project with the Sandyford Science Centre and indeed with the Science Gallery in Trinity. There are other developments there.
Indeed there are.
But really the ultimate decision there is for the promoters, and they do have a contract, and if they insist on that contract being fulfilled, that is their entitlement.
Who are the promoters?
The promoters are, it's a company, a charity company called the ICML, Irish Children's Museum Limited. Initially, there was about 13 people involved. I think it's now down to 5 or 6. The key people involved, the chairman is Michael Collins, barrister. Danny O'Hare, the former president of DCU, has recently stepped down, but he was very involved. He was the previous chairman. Ali Hewson is involved. They were the main parties involved in the defending or in the arbitration proceedings, and there are 3 or 4 other people whose names I can supply to you, but it's public record.
Yeah, I'd be obliged if you would. Chair, just the reason that this is so important, Chair, is because when this was agreed initially, there was no science museum in Ireland. There is a really excellent science museum, which is not in my constituency. I have no connection to it, but I visited it, as have hundreds of thousands of other people, which received support all the way through COVID with the employment scheme, all of the different COVID schemes. And now, there's a question about whether it reopens or not. I've no graw for any particular entity, but I have a big difficulty with the state being obliged to build something that already exists. And I just don't understand the rationale for it. And I feel that this is something that the PAC next year, the year after, is going to have to come back and back and back to. I feel that this is something that the CNAG is going to have to investigate thoroughly. I do not understand, and I want to just note it today, I do not understand how we can still be obliged to do something from 2007, and I'm glad to hear about your approach and the robustness. I was glad that you went through the two different arbitrations. I just genuinely do not understand it, and I think it's going to be a matter of note for the future for the CNAG in particular.
Just, I'm interested because I looked at this issue, and you may know more about it than I do, Deputy, but just from what the information I got on it, what I'm interested in is how we keep getting into these situations. The Deputy has mentioned the one out in Sandyford that was located there for 10 years or so, is it?
Yeah, slightly less, but
Right.
it's perfectly good.
Who owns that building?
It's privately owned. It's private.
What's wrong with it? Why have we to move from it?
Sorry, I beg your pardon?
Why have we to move from there?
No,
It's a separate development. It's a science museum developed by a private entity and operated. It's nothing to do with the state, as far as I'm aware.
Okay. So it's operated privately.
Yeah.
And in relation to the contract, in relation to this issue of why we're tied into it since 2007, when did we become entangled in this? Did the state become entangled in this? That we, in other words, that we could go into reverse gear and reverse out of it. When did that happen? Can anybody shed light on that?
Well, I think at that time, around 2000, if you remember, we were desperately trying to increase the profile of science, attract people into science and engineering education. And that's where the commitment stems from.
Yeah, but the commitment, but what? No.
Contract.
We were tied up in a contract here. That's why I'm anxious to find out. Mm-hmm. At what point did we get tied up? What year did we get tied up in this contract that we couldn't go into reverse gear?
2007.
2007.
2003, actually, I think it was the original contract.
Okay. And And in relation to, have we any control over, are we contractually tied into the state, tied in by contract into location and price at this stage, or price range?
Yeah, as a result of the various legal proceedings, unfortunately went down the legal route, but anyway, and the project has a lot of merits and so on, but it does need to be, or it would be beneficial, let's say, to tie in other players and have a holistic view.
Location is?
Location is the north wing of Earlsford Terrace, which is in itself, I mean, that is one aspect that is helpful. The Earlsford Terrace is a very important historic building. It was the exhibition back in the 1800s, and it is in very bad state of repair. People will know the concert hall on the south side of the building, and in fact the government has just approved a major investment in that. But the second half of the building will need major investment over the next decade in any case to repair it. So that offsets to some extent, but it doesn't fully answer the questions or concerns raised, but it's important.
I think it's a matter of considerable concern at this point that historically we've spent now 10 years. The OPW, in fairness, has tried to resist having to progress this, recognising the changing circumstances. There is a private entity that fulfils the function from this perspective of the state. The scale of the build-out cost, the fit-out cost, I have never seen a business case for it. I'm not sure if a business case exists within the OPW.
We'll get an answer for that. Does a business case exist?
Before the current arbitration, we were working with the promoters to develop a business case because this has to be financed, and it is certainly to the benefit of the group, who will be requiring further subsidy from the government to operate the centre, to develop a business case, cost-benefit analysis, go through the public spending code, and that process was underway in 2018-19, but it was never brought forward, and at a point in time the promoters decided no and went the arbitration route.
It's very unsatisfactory that we were tied into this. Thanks, Deputy.